I am Tina Hauer. I'm the Autism Spectrum Disorder TOSA. I am also a special education teacher at Falcon Heights, so my role is to go around and consult with teams and with teachers for students who are struggling with autism spectrum disorder to offer some support. So,
I think part of the reason that we're here today is because I know that not all of you are special ed teachers, but you will all have special ed students in your rooms. And part of what we see in our job is just like maybe it would be helpful to share some strategies of working with students with behavior disorders or on the spectrum, just so that you're kind of more equipped when that happens in your classroom. So I'm going to start off. You're stuck with me for the beginning. Tina's going to just wow you at the end.
I'm the, yes.
All right.
Sorry.
Just the arrow keys will work too.
Okay. Nope.
Wait, you're getting closer, maybe.
There's little keys on the right side, Tina, down the
Yep.
bottom.
Yep, I'm using those. Got it. Here we go.
All right, so just a little bit about EBD. About 1% of all students in Roseville receive services for EBD, and that's about 6.6% of all students in special education at Roseville. Tina helped me with the math on this, but that means that 1 out of every 100 students here is categorized as EBD. That's a true story today, too. So.
And when we're looking at our ASD population, so ASD stands for Autism Spectrum Disorder, and so I'm just going to speak clearly with that acronym, but about 2% of all of our students in Roseville are receiving special education services under ASD, and that's all students, like Jaren was saying, and then 13.5% of all students receiving special education service are receiving services under that category of ASD, and that means that 2 out of 100 students are on the autism spectrum receiving special education services. So
I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about everything you need to know about EBD, but this is the definition or how it's categorized. What I want to point out, which I think is most important, is that these behaviors would be happening over a long period of time. They have to be to a marked degree, and they need to adversely affect the child's educational performance. So we kind of look for those 3 things. You might have a kid that maybe has a bad week. That doesn't mean they're EBD. But certainly the strategies that I'm going to share would help in either situation. So what I really want to maybe share with you today, especially knowing that you're not all special ed teachers, just some general strategies for classroom and behavior management. Probably this is a review, but I've kind of just, based on what I see around the district, thought maybe there are some things we could kind of fine tune a little bit, and now you're a captive audience, so here you are. Obviously demonstrating caring. What I would say here, structure and routine, that's so important. I see that EBD kids, when they walk into a room and they don't know what to expect, they don't know what's going on, they can't predict what's going to happen next, it causes a lot of anxiety, which ends up causing behaviors. So as clear as you can be about the schedule, I see a lot of schedules posted, even like at the high school, we have a new schedule pretty much every day, right? Like we can't keep track of it, but they're posted everywhere, or at least we make that effort to do so, because then kids know what to expect. Taking charge and being in control of yourself. Remember that a behavior isn't a direction, or it's not a reflection of you. It's because they need something. They're trying to communicate with you through behavior. So as hard as it is, sometimes we can't take it personally, but really just try to figure out what we can do to help them. So sometimes that means being in control of yourself. And that's something I've had to learn over 10 years of setting 3 EBD, trust me. Communicate regularly and clearly with your students, establish enforceable rules, and then really stick to them. It's not going to help if you're making a rule and then never following through on it. If I say you guys can never chew gum in my class, and then I never go back and reinforce that or address it, that's not going to be a quality rule. With that said, if you need to, kind of scale down the rules, like maybe have a conversation with your team members and decide what is most important, what do we want to see in the classroom, and then focus on those things. High expectations. I get kind of frustrated just from my perspective being an EBD teacher. Sometimes I feel like expectations are lowered in order to reduce behaviors. I don't think that's being fair to the student. I think we owe them the same high expectations that we do other students. And if behavior is occurring, then we figure out a way to address that. Persistently deal with unproductive behavior. Sometimes that means ignoring, sometimes it doesn't. Having a neat and organized space really helps. If you walk into a place, like I'll give you an example, my boyfriend is probably one of the messier people on earth, and when I walk in and he has been home all day, it causes me anxiety because it's a mess, right? But if I walk home and I can tell that he picked up, then I'm like, oh, I'm in a better mood, everything's okay. So maybe that can inspire you, is kind of like, what would a student see when they're walking into your room? Make sure that things have a place, the students know where those places are. Try to comment only on a student's behavior, not on their personal traits. And I'll give you some examples of that in a little bit. Model desired behavior. If you have a student that's yelling in your class and you're yelling at him to stop, maybe you want to rethink that approach. Teach students to make appropriate choices, so maybe kind of help them, talk them through what those choices might be. They might not know. They might know and just be choosing not to do that. So if you can help them and talk them through that, that's always going to benefit them. And try to stay calm. Again, setting 3 EBD teacher for 10 years, I haven't always been calm. But when you are escalating, they are going to escalate too. So whatever you can do to kind of stay calm and talk in a neutral tone helps. Organize your teaching activities as best as you can and try to avoid unstructured times. I'm going to just say, especially when you have a sub, I know it's hard to do sub plans, but unstructured time and EBD kids, it's like a bad mix. So as much as you can when you're going to be out sick, or you know you have a group that may particularly be busy or rough with a sub, try to keep them busy during that time. And the same for your lesson planning. There are times when I get into a lesson, I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to take 30 minutes and we're done in 10. And then you're kind of in that like, oh shoot, what are we going to do? Maybe just keep some backup things that you can fall back on if that happens. And then what I think is really most important is providing opportunities for them to experience success and then get recognition for it. So maybe you have a kid that comes in every day and throws a pencil across the room, and then one day they didn't do it. Recognize them for that. That might be like, well, that's what they're supposed to do. But if you're acknowledging that they did a different thing that day, they might be more inclined to do it in the future. This is my favorite strategy, and I push this on everybody that I talk to every single time because it's cheap, it's easy, and it takes no prep. So this is called the 2x10 strategy. You got to identify one of your most difficult students. We all have them. And they're always the ones that come every single day. They never are absent, ever. So all this is for 2 minutes a day, 10 days in a row, you talk to that student about something other than school, behavior, grades. What that is doing is relationship building. And sometimes that's a challenge because that might be someone that you really want to talk to 10 days in a row for 2 minutes, but it's really important. And there's research behind it that it really does increase positive behavior because they have that connection with you. It might take longer than 10 days. You might have to put in 20. And maybe it works and then you move on to the next kid. But as a teacher, it's hard to think like, oh, I have one more thing I have to do. But I love this because it works and it's easy. Takes no prep. You might the first time have to think like, what am I going to try to say to get a conversation going? But hopefully after those first couple of days, it'll come a little bit more naturally. You're going to learn a lot about your students. And yeah, I think that pretty much says it all. The ones with the most challenging behaviors are probably the ones that you want to talk to first. Just want to point this out. There's a definite difference between positive reinforcement and bribery. Positive reinforcement is a behavior occurs, something is given or rewarded, and then you're encouraging the positive behavior. Bribery, sort of on the other end, it's a problem behavior and you do anything that you possibly could to make it stop, but then you're just reinforcing the bad behavior. The difference here is that positive reinforcement takes a little bit more planning, so you need to be mindful of what you're watching for and then recognize it when you see it, rather than those moments where you just want to make it stop. Now, full disclosure, we all have those moments, and sometimes that's what it takes, and you do it. So there's no judgment, because we've all done it. Prompting versus nagging. Again, Guilty. I feel like I'm like on Dr. Phil or something. I'm spilling all my dirty secrets to you. Prompting would be like a neutral tone in delivery. You're not raising your voice. You're not coming across angry. Just a neutral tone. Give specific directives for behavior. So like, I expect you to be in your seats right now. Maybe you need to use the child's name. John, I expect you to be in your seat right now. But you're not coming off in an angry way. You're not putting them down in any way. And it's all about behavior. Nagging would be more of a negative or annoyed voice. Avoid general statements or slogans, and that includes just saying, shh. Maybe it'll work. If it doesn't and you've tried it a couple times, try something else. Because if you're standing in front of a room of 30, which I don't know how you guys do it with 30 plus kids in your rooms, it always freaks me out because I'm used to like 10 max. If you're standing up in a room full of 30 busy students and you're just saying, shh, if they're not listening to you the first time, they're not going to start the third or fourth. So try to think of something else you can do. That would also include saying things like, just do it. Do what? Try to be really clear with what you're expecting. And this is a tricky one, and I know that we don't do this on purpose, but you don't want to ever say things like, oh, you're so lazy today. You might say something like, it seems like you're having a lazy kind of day. You don't want to put it on the student, but really make it about their behavior, not their characteristics. If you know me at all, you know this is my thing, restorative practices. So I sneak this in any way I can, but it really works. If this is something that you're interested in, feel free to contact me too, and I can help you get this going. But if you're using a more restorative approach, it's really about repairing the harm. And I think that's important that we're connecting behavior to harm that's being caused, whether or not it's like somebody hit somebody or if it was harm to the building or maybe the community. It's important that they have that perspective. So there are ways you can approach it like, who did you hurt or what did you hurt? When you're ready, what do you need to apologize for? So you're not rushing the student to be ready, but you're letting them know that it's okay and you're going to listen to them when they're ready to apologize. And then also letting them know, like, I'm ready to hear and accept your apology. If you can or want to, try to make a plan for them so that they can repair the harm. So maybe that means like if they were spitting water across the gym floor, maybe that means that they're going to go and help the custodian clean up the gym floor one day. Whatever harm they can repair. That also might mean that you want to include the custodian in the conversation about who was harmed. Try to frame questions about feelings instead of events. So rather than like, what happened in class? Like, how did you feel about what happened in class today? So try to just include feelings when you can. There are some other questions too, but I feel like I'm using up all Tina's time.
Oh, we got plenty of time.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
I'm ready. Yeah, I'm almost done though.
Okay.
Some other ideas that I like to encourage. I know how this comes across as like, really, does she have guided relaxation and calming music up there? Yes, I do. It works. I have done yoga and guided meditation with my Setting 3 EBD high school students. There are certain poses we avoid. But you can do simple stretching and breathing and lots of things like that. And they really get into it. In fact, I had a student today ask if we could do a guided relaxation. Anything you can do to kind of create a calm space, encourage breathing. There are some iPad apps that I love. If you teach younger students, there's a free one called Settle Your Glitter. They take it and shake up an iPad, and then there's a little puffer fish at the bottom that helps them breathe, and then the glitter settles. That's it. It's free. If you have a student that responds to that technology piece, this might really help. Another one I use with high school and personally is called Stop, Breathe, and Think. And what I like about this one is that they check in and it tracks their mood and how they're feeling physically and mentally. Then it suggests certain meditations. It might be a calm or a happy or walking meditation or whatever. They're about 5 to 7 minutes. And then they check in after and they kind of get a gauge of how that helped them emotionally and physically. What I also like about it is that I use it in class and it keeps track of the students' minutes that they spend meditating, doing guided relaxation. I try not to use the word meditating because people do sometimes connect it to religion, and I don't want that to happen. So it does track their minutes that they spend using it. So if you are looking for a way of holding them accountable, like with my students, I say, I'd like you to have 5 to 7 more minutes by Friday. And then they know that I'm going to be checking their iPad for it. Anything else you can do, like breathing activities, or if you have one of those spheres that you open and close, you can use that with them and have them breathe with that. Aromatherapy, as long as it's not too strong and that would cause anybody any issues with sensitivity. I really love giving busy students a job in the classroom. If you have a student that's using behavior as a way of getting attention, give them a job to do. You might have to make that job up, but maybe all of a sudden you really need blue paper from the office and he's the only one that can go get it. Do something where they can take pride in what they're doing at school and show you that they can do great things, and then recognize them for those things that they are doing. I also love telling cheesy jokes, and I also encourage students to, like I might say, tomorrow's your day to find a joke for the class. Pre-approve it, especially in high school, but for the most part, they've been appropriate. But then they like to, I put it on the whiteboard, and then I say, I'll put the answer the next day. It just gives them one more thing to kind of look forward to in class, and especially the kids with behavior, they kind of like taking charge in that way. Or I've even suggested in certain cases, if you've got a kid that's really wanting attention from the whole group, maybe give her a little bit of time to stand up and tell a couple jokes at the end of the day. Then she's getting attention, it's appropriate, it's positive, and it's kind of a way to help connect kids with each other. Sometimes kids with behaviors get alienated because other kids kind of pick up on the fact that they're causing trouble in class and they don't want to be associated with it. So if they can have those like normal, fun interactions with other kids, I think that helps a lot too. That's all from me. We will take some questions at the end, so if you have anything that you are wondering about, we'll also let you know how to get in touch with us if you need to. So here's Tina.
All right. Oh, this button.
Okay.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about autism spectrum disorders, or ASD. So, yes. So I want to talk about information on the student population and then some strategies for working with students. And when I was working on this, I was like, oh, I could go on, and I'm like, we only have about 30 minutes for the two of us, so I better consolidate. So, and I just have this nice quote from Dr. Stephen Shore, and it says, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So while I'm going to share some strategies, please know that each student on the spectrum is super unique, and so we need to be thinking about their unique needs. And like we do with all of our students, we think about their unique needs, but everyone is a little different, and what makes them tick is a little bit different. So autism is a spectrum of disorders, but the Minnesota State criteria in order to receive special education says that it's three different things. It's that impairment in social interaction, so difficulty relating to people, misinterpreting other people's social cues, difficulty making and keeping friends, and then it's an impairment in communication, so the inability to maintain conversation when speech is present. So in the classroom, that might look like, how was your day? Good. What did you do? Watch TV. Oh, I like to watch TV. Oh, okay. So it's not that back and forth expanding on that conversation. Limited understanding of nonverbal language. This particular population of students has a really difficult time understanding non-visual or nonverbal language. Things that relate to tone of voice, things that relate to body language, just all of that is really challenging for some of those kiddos to navigate through. So, and restrictive, repetitive, or stereotyped patterns of behaviors, interests, or activities. So these are the guys who liked the insistence of following rules and rituals and routines. They're rigid and rule-bound thinking. So they want, this is the way it is. Like, I always eat soup on Tuesdays, and now we're out of soup, and I don't know how to cope with that. So they want it to be this way, or I'm always first in line, or this is always my spot. And a limited range of conversation topics. I only want to talk about Minecraft. I only want to talk about my favorite things. And I think we all have our own limited range of conversational topics, but in situations, we can talk about more things. We can talk about the weather. We can talk about sports or things that we're not so interested in, but to make that small chat. So the student population, like I said, is a spectrum of needs. And I think it's increasing more and more. I think about at the start of my educational career, not very many students were identified as being on the autism spectrum, and it just slowly has increased. So 1 in 68 students or children are diagnosed. It's according to the CDC. So boys are oftentimes identified more than girls. And then there's some comorbidity with some mental health disorders too. So these kids are not only carrying around this educational need of autism spectrum, but they also may have anxiety, ADHD, bipolar, depression, or OCD. And there's some other things too that kind of come in. So I think we want to be mindful of that too, that these guys are navigating two different things sometimes. So just a little quote. So as we're going to transition into talking about strategies, we need to think about, like Temple Grandin said, there needs to be a lot more emphasis on what a child can do instead of what he cannot do. And I think coming from special education, we're kind of deficit driven. We're looking at our evaluations and we're saying this person has a hard time with all of this. And I think in the classroom too, and I can't speak to all of you, but I think sometimes we're like, this person is having such a hard time with X, Y, and Z, and we want to fix the problem. This person is reading 5 words per minute. This isn't good, but what can the student do? So we need to focus on what can the student do instead of what's hard and build from there. So I just want to talk about some strategies that work, and do know that I come from an elementary school background, and I try, so bear with me, high school people. It's really important for this population, like Jaren's population, is to have a predictable routine, but included in a visual schedule. So for the elementary level, for those people who aren't able to read yet, pairing it with pictures is really important. And so making sure that everybody knows what's going on and constantly referring to the schedule. We just had morning meeting, now it's time for math. We've just had math, now it's time for whatever is next. I particularly liked this schedule for maybe some upper grades because it talks about what they're going to do. They're going to introduce the words, do the word study, and definitions. And I thought, God, that gives a student who has a hard time transitioning his or her thoughts a kind of a heads up on what we're doing. And then they know exactly what's going on, which I really liked. So that was for high school. For you high school folks, I know a lot of you write like, we're going to do this activity, then we're going to do this activity, then we're going to do this activity. So same kind of thing. And just because they're in high school doesn't mean that they don't need a visual, and the 99% of your high school students, I'm assuming, are strong readers or can read. So it's important to have that. So, but some students need the visual schedule in the classroom, which works for all students too. But some students need their own individual schedules. So I just created I took a couple pictures of just some individual students' schedules to kind of help them kind of navigate. And so the idea then is to cross off what they've done and move on to the next one. So this one is really scripted. And when I printed out this schedule, I colored in the 30 minutes on that section. I don't have the technology skills to be able to figure out how to fill in the clocks. So I had to do them on my own. But just giving that really concrete of these are my things that I'm going to do. It's going to take me this long to do these things. And for those more open-ended spots, and this is my favorite thing, is just having a task list with these boxes. Because it really kind of helps the students kind of figure out what's going on. And I like to use it you can have it on the whiteboard, you can have it on a piece of paper, on a Post-it note, on a scratch sheet of paper, and just, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do problems 1 through 3, we're going to do problems 4 through 6, we're going to take a break, and then it's going to be time for reading. So just kind of lay it out so they have that visual schedule, and then it's really affirming. To cross things out. Who doesn't like to cross things out off their to-do list? So if we're motivated by that as adults, students are motivated too. So, And then be mindful, these guys have difficulty with communication. I think some of our kids on the autism spectrum are highly verbal, and they have this highly verbal skills and are able to share a lot of information about different facts and different things, but they still have difficulty with communicating other things that are really important, you know, their feelings and their thoughts and different things. Well, they might know everything about Thomas the Train. They need some support on being able to express themselves in other ways. So when you're teaching in your classroom, try to use visuals to support academic instruction, and then use visuals to support behavior self-regulation. So using a take a break card, you know, having a poster in the classroom that kind of talks about what you're learning about in the upper grades, you know, just writing out those expectations or giving them a note to have. And sometimes just writing out your expectations, like you look like you're really frustrated, you need to take a break, removes your language, and it gives the student a lot of power. And so that's one thing to be really mindful of, is especially when our students become escalated, it's so much more powerful to use no language or provide language in writing in a visual, so that they know what to do or what your expectation is. So writing out, go take a break, or your next job is this, to help with that transitional piece. And then using nonverbal gestures is important too. So, you know, and just this, if we're going this way, or I'll use the stop, sign language sign to help people, or just wait to help with those communication pieces. So when speaking, and especially if somebody is maybe feeling a little agitated or escalated, using that direct language. Put the marker down instead of, can you put the marker down? I don't know. Can I? You know, can I go to the bathroom? I don't know. Can you? So, you know, put the marker down, or put this away. Is really important. And then avoiding sarcasm. This population of students has a hard time understanding social motive and understanding different needs of people. So avoiding that sarcasm is really kind of important. And then always think about, behavior is oftentimes a communication of something going wrong in the environment, or something going wrong for the student. So what is that behavior trying to communicate to you? What is not working for that student? Are you being too verbal? Are you, and it's not about you either, but are the lights too bright that day? Or did that student have a rough time on the playground and you just don't know it because the student hasn't communicated that? So oftentimes when we see some behavior, it's a sign of communication and needs not being met. So this population of students oftentimes needs some extra time to process information. So when you're giving verbal instructions, check back with the student to see if they have a if they understand. You know, go in and say, I just wanted to make sure that your directions, that you understood the directions. What are we going to do? Provide a task list, I think, is really powerful. So everybody knows what's going on. Set clear expectations. You know, we're going to start this, and then I want you to get to problem number 5. A lot of the times with this population of students, sometimes when they're done, they're done. You know, if you say, do problems 1 through 5 and they're finished early, then you're like, oh, well, why don't you do the next problems? These guys they're done, because their expectation was problems 1 through 5. And so sometimes adding that additional work can kind of escalate. So be clear. Like, I only want you to do problems 1 through 5. That's it. And if you get to the other ones, that's great. That's bonus. But try not to pull that into the rest of the assignment. So, for social expectations, allow the students to model appropriate social behavior. So making sure that other students are modeling that behavior, but also you're giving those students time to practice. So engaging in that social interaction can be a lot of anxiety producing. So allow that student to practice before having to do it in a larger group setting. So maybe in a smaller group, you know, you have your 4 kids and you're working on greeting for morning meeting, or you're working on, you know, in the high school level, you're working on shaking hands because they're having a job interview, but you're practicing that first in a safe environment before moving into a larger environment. So pre-teach some social skills and expectations, so letting the students know, like we're going on a field trip. I expect you to be able to sit the whole time, and it should look like this while you're at the theater. So pre-teaching that skills. And then when students have social problems or just problems in general, or maybe after an escalated state, I think it's really important to wait for the student to calm down. And use those visuals to process. I often am notorious for drawing pictures of these stick people with people's thoughts coming out of their heads to show what other students are thinking, because a lot of the times those students are not able to process what other people may be thinking, but we are. And that's okay.
I don't know how to go back. My battery's going low there.
And then also, I think what I was going to say is, no, I don't know. Just honor their perspective. These guys have difficulty in perspective taking sometimes, and so honor their perspective. Like, even if it's not the right perspective, like you need to say, okay, I hear you, I hear where you're coming from. It's very powerful to be like, I'm so sorry that you're feeling frustrated about this, and I'm going to work to figure it out. And then just kind of leave it at that, instead of engaging in this power struggle that says, no, you did it, no, I did it. So that's important. Also, one thing that I know that when I'm out in the schools and when I'm talking to the general education teacher about a special education student, oftentimes they're like, transitions are really hard for this student. And so make sure that you have transition routines. Maybe it's the same all the time. Maybe in high school, 3 minutes before the bell rings, you line up and you can have free chat time. Or at the elementary level, we put our book away, we put our pencil away, we do all of these things. Provide a warning before transition, and then making sure that you're following through. Like if your expectation is X, Y, and Z, make sure that it works. Using a visual is very helpful, and using a time timer or even on your iPad is really kind of helpful for those guys who have a really hard time with understanding time and the concept of time. And even I've seen it used in the middle school level, and you can most certainly use it in the high school level, to show the timer that counts down. We have 25 minutes. Here's the timer. Check the timer. See how much time you have left. And it really helps with that organizational piece. I think this is my last slide, I hope. So also, we have to keep in mind too that there's some sensory needs, and so we need to allow for that movement. And like Jaren was saying, have people run errands to the office if they're doing something that they, you need them to just move, have them run an errand to the office. I have a student every day who brings my walkie-talkie down to the office every day, and that's his job, even though I probably need the walkie-talkie, not the office. So, and allow for that movement during transition. Get up and dance for a little bit, or get up and move about. And then be mindful, allowing students to stand instead of sit, or pace instead of sit in their spot. We all have different ways of accessing those information, and I think we want to be mindful that we're giving everybody what they need. And then you can teach kids how to use fidgets and quiet sensory regulating items. And think about, if something is challenging for the student, is it because they're having an overreaction? Is the lunchroom too loud for the student? Is it too stressful? Is it causing too much anxiety?
You're cut off.
So I'm done. So that's kind of it. And I think that there's a lot more to talk about, probably both of our populations, but we did want to give you guys a little bit of time for some questions. So it's perfect because we have about 5 minutes left, Julie.
My bad, yeah, my battery.
So it worked out really well. It was Sarah, you don't have to listen to me talk anymore.
You have to listen to me talk. One thing that we wanted to communicate with you is, if you have other questions, you can certainly email us. If you're concerned about a student, or you have a question relating to something in your class, the way to go about including us would be to go through your special education team at your school. Hopefully you kind of have an idea of who those point people are. Speak to them. See what you can do in the building, because really we are here to support special education students. Not that that's all we can do, but really that's how to contact us. So make sure you're connecting with your special education team first, and then let them sort of navigate as a way of connecting to us. Questions?
Questions?
What were some of the names of the apps for those?
Oh,